Breathe Right, and look for the calming scent of new Breathe Right lavender in the sleep aisle.
Maybe you saw my letter last week to Kansas Governor Sam Brownback, but I don't think he saw it. Maybe it was returned to sender, because in that letter, I detailed the governor's recent doubling down on his march to zero income taxes, his refusal to ask the state's wealthiest to pay their fair share, while simultaneously hiking taxes on cigarettes and liquor. Now this week, more details about Governor Brownback's plan to fix his state's mangled finances are coming to light. The governor wants to cut classroom funding for Kansas schools by $127 million. I want to underline that. As part of the plan to dig the state of Kansas out of a nearly $1 billion hole, which the governor helped to create, he wants to cut classroom funding by $127 million. And Kansas, you may remember, is the same place where a state court panel ruled just last month that the education funding was so low, it was unconstitutional. Joining me now from Kansas City, Missouri, is Joan Wagnon, who is chair of the Democratic Party of Kansas. She's the former Secretary of Revenue for the Kansas Department of Revenue and a former state representative. Joan, I want to ask you about the plan, the formula that was put into place in 1992. You were part of that, and help people who aren't from Kansas to understand what it is that the governor is now doing and how that will impact that formula.
The 92 formula came about because of a court case that said we were not funding all students equally. Before that, it had just been legislators lined up, and whoever had the most votes, their schools got the most money. So this formula does exactly what the governor says he wants a new formula to do. It delivers money equitably to all students, and it makes sure that that they are treated equally and adequately. The adequate is the problem because he won't put money in it. So when he's cutting this $127 million now, the formula can't possibly work because it doesn't have enough money in it. What the old formula or the current formula does is make sure that poor kids get a little extra, students who maybe speak a second language or English is not their first language, students that live very, very far away from their school district have transportation money. So there are a number of factors that are taken into account to make sure that there's equity. In addition to that, property tax rich districts get less state aid than the poor property tax districts. And so that's part of the fairness. People have talked about scrapping it. I don't know how they're going to get rid of it and still be constitutional. So
help me to understand a bit here what the governor's other options would be. I mean, you've got $1 billion deficit. He's saying, well, here's a place where I can, kind of go and pull some of it out. What other alternatives does he have?
Well, the first thing that he could do that would be correcting the problem is get rid of his tax proposal. He's giving 190,000 people who are primarily business owners like doctors and lawyers no tax. They pay zero income tax in Kansas. And he's cut the higher rate much lower. It's a 27% cut at the top. He could restore those cuts. He could take away that exemption, and he'd have plenty of money to fund schools, to take care of people in need, to fund Medicaid expansion, and all of those things that are so very important.
So what are the politics then of Kansas that, I mean, clearly the governor was reelected and must believe he has a kind of political basis for doing this?
The governor was barely reelected. He even got less than 50% of the vote. But what he has is an awful lot of very conservative Republicans in the House. But they don't like this plan either, because what the governor wants them to do is raise cigarette taxes and raise liquor taxes, take away exemptions in the income tax for the home mortgage exemption on your federal tax. They don't like his plan either. So what they're going to have to do is realize that we cannot go to zero on income tax and sustain the services that we have. And the losers are going to be children in the classroom, poor people, and in fact, he's going to destroy the business climate of the state.
Joan, hold for me just one second, Bryce. I just want to get you in on this because it does feel like it is kind of a demonstration project, the thing we've been talking about this morning around issues of inequality.
Absolutely. I think Kansas has been an experiment in trickle-down economics. If you cut taxes, will your state grow? Will the pot grow for everybody? And the evidence right now coming out of it is no. You're going to have a huge budget hole. The jobs rate in that state has lagged behind the national average, and he's now having to resort to things like cutting education to paper over that hole. So, you know, we're looking at income inequality. Always has to go back to tax rates because that's been the biggest driver for income inequality. We can look at this experiment and say maybe we need to look at the top and how people are taxed and think about rearranging those rates so that they're a little bit more fair.
But David, I mean, this feels to me, again, connected to the thing that we've been talking about. If poor children in Kansas don't have the same literally don't have the same opportunity to rise up that ladder as, say, the Waltons. Like, this is the kind of thing that it seems to me strikes Americans as patently unfair.
Yes. Poor education for poor children is a very big problem in our country. What the governor said in the clip, and I'm no expert on it, but what the governor said in the clip was that he wanted to move money away from the school bureaucracy and into the classroom. Considering that we have quadrupled education spending in the United States, and yet test scores have stayed flat for 40 years, that suggests that putting more money into the schools is not the answer. And that's why libertarians have talked about giving poor kids options. Let them go to non-governmental schools, to a voucher or a tax credit or something like that. Well, and Governor Brownback seems to be only talking about rearranging money in the public schools. I don't think that's a sufficient answer to the problem of poor schools for poor kids.
Joan, I'm going to give you 20 seconds to just finish us up here. Would you like to respond to that?
Yeah, there are a number of ways to solve the problems, and getting vouchers for poor children, school choice, we already sort of have that in the ability of people to move from one district to another as long as they don't upset a racial balance. So that alone is not going to solve it. But what's wrong is the money does go to the classroom. It's not truthful that it doesn't go to the classroom. It does.
Joan Wagnon in Kansas City, Missouri. Thank you so much for joining us. And of course, we were reminded whenever we start talking about Kansas and education that, of course, it was Brown v. Board of Topeka, Kansas, that the questions of fairness is right there at the center of our nation. Barbara Trainum's going to be back in the next hour. Thank you to Bryce Covert, also to Hector Cordero Guzman, and to David Bowes. Up next, more on America's children and why some parents are now paying more for childcare than for their mortgage.
Meet the world's newest energy superpower. Surprised? In fact, America is now the world's #1 natural gas producer.